Let me bring in Vipula Waniga Sekara, who's also live with us, senior lecturer, ECU, meditation and Reiki healer, is live with us from Sri Lanka. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Tell us a bit about how you practice Buddhism there.
Well, it's as you probably know, Sri Lanka is practicing primarily Theravada tradition. As you know, Buddhism has several traditions, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and so on. But in Sri Lanka, we practice mostly the Theravada tradition, which you find in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and so on. But of course, when you say these traditions, the teachings are the same. So in the last 10 years or so, people have, or rather, the practice of Buddhism has been scattered now. People are moving into meditation, some are going in for discussion, some are going in for various analytical research studies, scientific studies. So in Sri Lanka, people practice Buddhism in so many ways, but traditionally you have the Poe days, the full moon day. It's not a working day. They all observe precepts. They go to temples, and then they are sort of spending that time observing precepts as well as listening to Dhamma and then entering into discussions. And we have probably over 15,000 Buddhist temples all over the island. And the temples are very much connected to people. And so do the Buddhist monks. So there are people who are very much into meditation, and some people are into discussion. Now that you have the social media, especially the YouTube, there are so many discussions on the YouTube, sermons and various discourses. So they have the access to the internet to understand Buddhism. But having said that, in the last 10 years or so, people are getting more and more curious as to the understanding of life and existence. Because, you know, after practicing this Dhamma for so many years, they need to understand more about the existence. So,
yes,
in the last 10 years or so, people have begun to turn the attention to themselves.
Right.
How mind works.
Right. I have to also ask you, what's the most important part of your practice according to you?
Would you mind repeating the question?
What's the most important part of your practice according to you?
Well, if you ask me, I think if you are able to, I think this is connected to our friend from Russia. If you are able to practice the Brahma Vihara, that is the Metta, which is loving kindness, Karuna is compassion, Mudita is altruistic joy, and Upekka is equanimity. If you can practice these four elements to its highest order, then you can call yourself a Buddhist and not otherwise. Otherwise, you can get into any kind of practice, but if you don't have those qualities with you, I don't consider anyone as a Buddhist if you don't perform, at least to some extent, some of these qualities. I hope I
yes,
made myself
absolutely.
clear.
Now, India also, let me ask you, Vipula, is making a Buddhist trail connecting Lumbini to places like Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha attained enlightenment, also Nalanda. Would you be excited to visit this?
I mean, it's not a question even to raise, because Sri Lankans have been visiting all these places for the last so many years in large numbers, from Isipatana to Bodh Gaya to all these places, and we have the pilgrimage. There are a lot of travel agents who are organizing this pilgrimage to places because these locations are connected to Buddha's biography. So people venerate these places. So actually you don't have to promote people. People will continue to come.
Absolutely. How can India and Sri Lanka better connect to promote Buddhist heritage and culture?
Well, there are two things here. Initially, Lord Buddha is supposed to have visited Sri Lanka 3 times. So that story has very much embedded into the culture here. Then secondly, the King Dharmashoka sent his son and the daughter, as monks to this country to spread Buddhism, and that is what remains in the country until today.
Okay. Also, how can people all over the world imbibe Buddhist practices in their everyday lives? What would be advice to everyone?
Yeah, now the spiritual aspect of Buddhism is something which is very critical now, because if you look at what is happening in other parts of the world, especially in the Western countries, some call themselves non-dual teachers and some call themselves spiritual teachers, but most of those messages they communicate to their respective audiences are found in Buddhist scriptures. Now, I myself have done a research study, which I actually used for my PhD degree, where all these messages that are communicated to large audiences, from Krishnamurti to Osho to Tony Parsons to Jim Newman, I mean, all these modern people who are saying the spiritual messages, those messages are found in Buddhist discourses 2,500 years ago. So it's a question of how to get across to this modern world. Now, that has been the problem. Although we have these scriptures, somehow there is a failure, I don't know on whose part, to communicate these messages across to the Western world, whereas the spiritual practitioners in those countries are using the essential messages to effectively communicate Buddha's words to their audiences.
Yes. Now, quickly before we end, I'd like to ask you about the succession plan. Now, the Dalai Lama, of course, a very crucial figure for Buddhism and for Tibetans. Do you believe that the world should ensure that their right to self-determination is protected? Their right to decide the succession plan is protected? Should the world protect their right?
I don't think I'm competent enough to answer that question, because I have not studied this, the nexus, between the Tibet and China. To be very honest, so I don't want to speak on anything that I am not.
Do you believe that it's wrong if China tries to hijack the succession plan and appoint someone of their choosing?
No, let me tell you that if you ask all the leaders of the world to observe these simple 4 practices, you can resolve any problem. Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha. It's very simple.
No, because the Dalai Lama, of course, is going to decide on his successor very soon. Do you believe he should have the right to decide, or should China try and dictate that?
No, you see, I don't want to answer something because there are political elements into this, so it's not my forte.
So you don't believe the Dalai Lama and Tibetans should have the right to decide the succession plan?
Yeah, basically, I think Dalai Lama is, belonging to Mahayana tradition, and these are all emanating from the same teachings of Buddha. But whether there is a right for Tibetan or not is something which is.
I think it's a very fair right. If the Dalai Lama wants to decide his successor, he should be allowed to do so. Who is China to try and object to that?
Yeah, when you send me the invite to discuss this matter, I said I have not studied.
This
succession plan.
You're running away from that question. It seems, but I think the writing is there on the wall. The Tibetans want a succession plan, and the Dalai Lama, of course, will be deciding on his reincarnation very, very soon. Let's take a break. Much more coming up on the other side. Thank you very much, Vipula, for joining us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.